Hey, welcome to the Blade Fit Today podcast, where we discuss the lively world of historical fencing and everything else related to the sword arts around the globe. So today we've got Geoffrey Beeson. You know what? I totally failed. Do you go by Jeffrey or Joffrey?
Geoff is fine.
Jeff. Go by.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, Geoff Beeson. I know because it's the classic spelling, right?
Yep.
Okay, well, and we've been sitting here talking this whole time, and our names are sitting there. But okay, so we've got Geoff Beeson. Geoff Beeson, he's the chief instructor for Five Circles Martial Arts in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He has studied Japanese martial arts, including swordsmanship, striking, grappling, and general weapons use, the history and the culture for more than 20 years. He has actually managed to lead something, and he has actually managed to learn something in that time. As an instructor for more than 15 years, he has worked at developing the practice of Kenjutsu and contributing to his art. In 2008, he implemented and oversaw a complete curriculum overhaul with his style, mostly because he likes people to do things his way. In 2016, Geoff began experimenting with HEMA. You know how that goes, and has since worked to further develop his Japanese swordsmanship using steel weapons against a variety of HEMA styles and practitioners. There's almost nowhere and no one this guy won't fight. And he says he may not win, but we shall see. He believed that practice of Kenjutsu could be elevated and evolved through use of steel sparring and modern protective gear, and is working to spread the practice in the Japanese martial arts community, though they mostly think he's a crackpot. Geoff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nate.
Now,
I appreciate you using my introduction and all the humor that my terrible humor that was baked therein.
I love it because I love self-deprecation. I do it for myself, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it without your approval. So he gave it to me, folks, and so
Yeah.
I even toned it down just a little bit.
Yeah, I made a lot more fun of myself when I wrote it. So
Yeah. All right. Well, man, let's get into it. So, anyway, you're a very interesting fellow. People in the HEMA community like to watch you fight. You're a subset of a subset of a subset, right? You like martial arts, you like Kenjutsu, and you like fighting with guys who also do, traditional European sword arts, and that is a very small group of people that could fit into that category. And so I find that actually very fascinating. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you today. And so let's just go ahead and get into, I'm just going to call it sword discipline.
sure.
Why swords?
I mean, come on, swords are cool.
Swords are
You
cool.
know, no, so I started, like you said in the intro, about 20 odd years ago. Oh God, it's more than that now at this point. Anyway, but it's been more than 20 years. We'll just leave it at that.
Sure.
And swords were always something that I was really interested in. And it was also something that just wasn't readily available in the martial arts world when I was growing up. I mean, there was a taekwondo school on every corner. You could learn karate, but there wasn't, I mean, there's this whole martial arts culture out there that we know about through movies and comic books and whatever, but there's nobody actually teaching it. And so I was always just kind of interested and obsessed with the sword. And then finally, I found an instructor that was working on teaching Japanese sword work here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and started with him about 20 years ago. And he and I have been working together ever since.
That's interesting. So what I took from that was that because swords are cool.
Well, yeah, because swords are cool. I mean, that's the bottom line. Is I mean, and I don't know. I mean, why does anybody come to the practice of swordsmanship?
Yeah.
I think that there is a romantic allure to swordsmanship. Why does anybody stick with swordsmanship? I think that's a deeper question. It's like
Yeah.
when you do find the practice of swordsmanship, why does it resonate with you? for me, why did I come to swordsmanship? Because swords are cool. But why have I stuck with swordsmanship for more than 20 years now? The way I move with the sword, the way that practice helps me kind of strengthen my body and strengthen my mind and work on that discipline has just been something. I mean, I've done a lot of physical disciplines. I've played lots of sports. I've done yoga. I've done, the various cross training. I've done all sorts of exercise, and nothing has ever kind of had that unifying effect of I don't know. There's just a certain something about sword work that resonates with me in a way that nothing else does.
It's a very deep well, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. And it's, I like to ask people about that because it is a hard one to quantify. Why swords, right? Because I mean,
Mhm.
if you're doing self defense, no one has swords. I mean, unless you happen to, be like on a banana plantation and,
Sure,
or something
sure.
like that, right?
Yeah.
Haitians would beg to differ. They got machetes everywhere. But, if for most of the planet now, self defense is not sharpened steel swords.
No,
Um,
no. And then I guess that's a good point to kind of go to, like, when you look at swordsmanship or even martial arts as a practice, there are a lot of aims for martial arts, and self-defense is one that's heavily lauded out there as far as, oh well, study this martial art or that martial art for self-defense purposes. But we're all much more likely to be killed by heart disease.
yep.
So I would say that if I want to save a student's life, I'm much better off having them work out than than teaching them particular techniques. I say sometimes the self defense aspect of the industry is a bunch of insurance salesmen selling policies for something that's probably not likely to really ever happen to somebody. So it's like self-defense. I teach self-defense. Self-defense is something that martial arts can provide you, but that's not my main goal. My main goal is kind of improve my life, improve myself, and have fun. That's probably the top line. Is I just like to enjoy myself with this practice.
Well stated. And that's just it, isn't it? Because it's fun. Does
Yeah.
something need to have a deep practical daily reason for you to get into it and enjoy it and try and get good at it and be driven by it? Well, the answer is obviously no. There's all kinds of frivolous things that people do. It brings them joy. But I do think that for those who really get into the sword arts, or the sword disciplines, whatever you want to call it, there is always a challenge that comes. Like every time I pick up a sword, there's always something I want to do with it. It's like you're chasing the perfect golf swing and you're just never quite there.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and but the joy that comes from just the chase, right,
Sure.
is it's hard to describe. I won't try, but it's there.
Yeah.
There's something, and I guess what you're saying, the romance, right? There is a certain romance to it, and it's alluring. And when you're outside and the sun's shining a little bit and the gleam on the blade and all that, I mean, it's so many things. It's so many things.
Absolutely.
You're in sync with your mind and your body and the sword, and you're just doing certain things, and you look good. You look good. People are kind of looking at you like, wow, dude, that's amazing. It's like, yeah, it's that's what it is. That's what it is for
Yeah.
me.
Absolutely. No, I think that describes it really well, and it's yeah, it's something that is perpetually challenging too. Like you said, that chase of the perfect golf swing, you know, um, but it's both that and just constantly trying to understand new puzzles on the other side of it.
Mm.
So it's like you've got all of these various training partners, and in competition, opponents that present you. I mean, even if you do the same style as somebody else, everybody moves differently. Everybody thinks differently. And so every confrontation, every face off has got its own unique puzzle and challenge to play with. And it's just endlessly engaging for me.
Yeah, well stated. So, martial arts, you've been doing this for over 20 years now. And, you started from somewhere, but now
Mm-hmm.
you're the main instructor for Five Circles Martial Arts. So, can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Sure. So, I when I started, I started out working on three separate disciplines. Kempo is our system's striking art, and then we did we studied kendo techniques at the time, though we didn't adhere strictly to the modern kind of kendo interpretations of the rules. And I don't know if you're familiar with kendo as a sport, and kind
A
of
little
how
bit.
the rules work. So kendo as a sport, kind of like Olympic fencing, is very formalistic and has very specific rules, and the types of contacts that are not allowed under the sport might be combatively applicable. It's like if I hit somebody in the leg or hit somebody in the shoulder, that's a perfectly dangerous shot with a weapon. Um, but that's not a scoring point under the rules. And so we were studying kendo techniques at the time, but we were using expanded targets, and we were using um, basically we were breaking the rules, and we were allowed to do anything that we thought was martially applicable.
You're a
More
rebel.
in yeah, I guess more. It's more similar to a pre-World War II style of the practice, which was called Gekken or Gekiken. And you know, after World War II, Japan went through a whole process of demilitarizing and taking the martial out of its martial arts as much as possible, so that the occupying force of the US didn't keep them from doing it at all. It was like, okay, we want to keep doing our traditional martial arts, but we're gonna take out the martial piece of it a little bit, and we're gonna, this is a sport, or this is a meditative practice,
Mm.
and it's all gonna be unified. And so there was a lot of evolution of the Japanese martial arts post World War II into a very different direction. And so we were trying to look at it from more of a pre-World War II, you know, anything goes, a little bit of grappling, any targets. And so that's what we started with. And we evolved the book of techniques that we worked, and we started to including cutting mechanics into what we were teaching and studying, and the curriculum developed from there. And then after studying together for about 10 years. As you mentioned in your intro, I helped lead the curriculum overhaul in 2008, where we just really revamped everything from the ground up and made a very systematic approach to all of the stuff that we had put together, all the stuff that we had learned and wanted to present. Um, and so I helped lead that curriculum overhaul. And that was my big step from kind of just being a student and assistant instructor to really helping with curriculum development, which was a really interesting process. How do you take all these physical skills and array them along a timeline for somebody's progression to help them kind of master one bit at a time in some sort of progressive way? It was an interesting mental challenge.
Yeah,
But
that's fascinating.
I think we continued on with that for a number of years, and then in about 2018, I think about 2018, maybe 2017, I became good friends with a gentleman here in town that runs a local HEMA chapter, a chapter of a HEMA school. And um, I told him, oh, I do Japanese sword, and he's like, okay, well, we should do swords sometime. And then I went out to watch them a little bit and saw what they were doing. It's like, oh, you guys hit each other with steel. You're crazy. Like, what are you doing? It's like, I've been training with a bamboo sword for you know 17 years at that point. And I'm like, I don't know that I can get behind this, but I can't really knock it till I tried it. So I let them gear me up, and I think the first thing I ever sparred steel with, I think I did saber the first time I ever did it, just because it was a curved blade. I'm like, all right, this is kind of katana-esque.
So
We'll go with
one-handed
this.
katana.
Yeah. So I did some saber, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was a lot of fun, and I thought, okay, so we can actually use steel to train with. This is something I'd never really even considered doing before. So I go out and I begin my internet search. I'm like, okay, I need a steel sparring katana, and at the time there was nothing. There was just nothing out there. So I started working with a maker in China, to that they were a production katana maker, and I said, hey, would you be willing to make one to these specs? And eventually I got my hands on my first couple of prototypes of a sparring katana, and then I was able to get out there and really do what I do with the HEMA guys locally. And I actually took my katana to a HEMA tournament here in Oklahoma, and they let me play, and I just had a great time with it. And I thought, there's got to be more people out there that want to do this. And so I started developing that more, and now we've changed our curriculum at the school where we don't require steel, because it's kind of one expression or one method. So
Yeah.
sometimes people are uncomfortable with it, or they need to
Mhm.
grow into it.
Yes.
So we do synthetics, and we still use some bamboo from time to time, but steel is now a heavy part of our focus, and it's changed a lot about how we do a lot of things. I've
Yeah, I was going to
learned a
ask you
lot.
about that. The difference between using the sticks and the steel. What are
Yeah.
some of the differences you find?
Well, so the shinai, the bamboo swords, it's made up of four boxed flat pieces of bamboo that are all kind of wrapped together. Um, they're compared to a steel sword. I mean, this is kind of like, well, yeah, duh, but they're a lot lighter than steel. And the biggest place where that comes into play as far as the actual interactions go is in the recovery time.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a lot more flippant with flinging your shinai out there, whether or not it's a good shot or whether or not you're fully committed to it, because you're going to be able to pull it right back and have it right back in firing position again, in no time at all. But you do that with a steel sword. Every time you swing the steel, there's a much more significant amount of time that it takes to get that sword back into a usable position, and there's really an opportunity for the opponent to take advantage of that timing. And so the very the commitment level had changed quite a bit. One of the other things that we discovered was that, compared to bamboo, which is a shinai is very bouncy, it's very live, right?
Mm-hmm.
It deflects very, very well. Steel is very dead in comparison. It takes a lot more, what we would call blade interface, to make the steel move, right? A
Mm-hmm.
gentle brush with the side of a shinai is usually enough to deflect something off course. And when I first started working with steel, I would do that, and I'd still get hit. I'm like, okay, wait, something's not working. And it's like, well, the sword is flexing, the other sword is flexing. There's a lot more inertia in the material. All in all, it's just a lot harder to change those courses, change those angles of attack and whatnot. So it required some significant adjustments to some of our techniques that we did.
It's really interesting how, just going back to how you said that saber was a lot like a katana, and just hearing the process of your instruction once you started using the steel, right? So you're using
Hmm.
the shinai, and you're going through. You guys call it a shinai?
Yeah, the bamboo sword. Yeah,
Yeah,
shinai.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Versus the steel, and just the differences, and it's funny because training with so I teach British military saber. It's one of the bread and
Hmm.
butter things
Hmm.
we do, and so we use single stick, right? So it's traditionally they would use pieces of ash, but
Hmm.
it's so much easier to use rattan.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we use, and so we have sticks and steel in our class as well. And there is differences, and all the things you said is totally true. The stick just travels so much faster. There's not it has a different dynamic to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is easier to displace.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it is faster to come right around, and just the way that you approach the attack, you could get away with things with the stick that you cannot get away with the steel. And your defense with the steel, you do it a slightly different way, and it's more it's harder to get past the defense in the with
Mm-hmm.
the saber technique.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, I just found that really fascinating because as you're describing the use of the shinai with the use of the steel. Now the techniques though are a little bit different with the Japanese swordsmanship, isn't it?
Sure.
So the HEMA style, there's a lot of binds, there's a lot of parries, there's a lot of checking, all that kind of thing. But from what I understand, that's not so much so in the Japanese tradition. And I was wondering if you could just sort of talk about why that is.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I will kind of say, and it's something that is, I mean, every grouping of arts is prone to the generalization, and so when you look at Japanese swordsmanship, um, there are significant differences between the eras of Japanese swordsmanship, and even then, within the same era, different styles have some significant differences. And even the katana itself, if you're just going to look at the katana, it's not a monolith. It's not one thing, right? It
Right.
is, the katanas that were in use in the battlefields in the 1600s, thicker, heavier, longer handles. The katanas that were in use for court dueling later in the 1700s, or sorry, I'm getting my getting my centuries twisted around. Well, yeah, so 1700s anyway. But later on, the court style fencing katanas, as it were, for duels, a lot faster, shorter handles, more often used one handed because they were used from the draw or kind of as a hand and a half kind of weapon. So the sword evolved a lot over time, depending on what its use was and what its target was. If it was going to be used against an armored opponent, it tended to have a much thicker spine and much heavier overall mass versus something that was going to be used against an unarmed opponent. So, with that said, neither the sword nor the styles are really monolithic. So, any generalizations I make, anybody will be able to come in and say, oh, but, oh, but, oh, but. Okay,
There's
granted.
always that.
So, there's always that. But with that noted, um, most styles, except for emergency interception, most styles avoid any edge on edge contact. Um, Japanese swords were historically noted to be very sharp, and the steel on the front edge of the sword was very hard, and so it was also very prone to chipping. And a break was much more likely to occur through the front edge of the sword than it was through the softer steel on the outsides or the back. Um, and so you will see more side deflection and you will see more spine deflection than you will see edge deflection, because the edge tended to be a little bit more fragile. And swords and steel were very expensive. At any point in history, Europe had a much more of a wealth of steel available, of iron ore available. The Japanese were pulling it out of sand, as it were, and smelting it down and getting what they could out of it. They were able to make decent swords out of what really was terrible, terrible steel, through the processes they created. I mean, that was really the magic of Japanese smiths, was the fact that they were able to make a decent sword out of the steel that they had to use. But so a lot of those techniques, I think, and historians will argue and differ, but were driven by kind of the nature of the sword. Katanas were also compared to things like sabers or especially later long swords. Um, they were very rigid. They were not flexible at all, and so you didn't need the structure of the edge to deflect with. A lot of swords that are very flexible need that structure of the edge and the broads, or that linear part of the blade to kind of drive into the deflection. Katanas are made to be very inflexible, so they can effectively parry with the sides, and that was one of the biggest struggles that we had in coming up with a sparring katana, is that a lot of people really want flexibility in the thrust with their blades, but then you immediately start to reduce its effectiveness doing Japanese style techniques. Very tricky balancing act. But
isn't that interesting? Yeah, because
yeah,
you appreciate a flexible blade when you suffer a thrust, but for the parry, you want the different
yeah,
characteristic, just like you were
yeah,
saying. Yeah, you
yeah.
know what? I didn't even think of that. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Okay, so let's paint a little picture here. So let's
Okay.
say that I'm in Tulsa and I'm starry eyed. I'm like, oh man, five circles martial arts, here I come. Like, so I'm a student and I come in for the first time. Like, what could I expect as a student just walking uh, in
Yeah. So
in
we
your
we
house?
uh, we uh, we have a really great space that we train in. It's this really large kind of gymnasium auditorium at one of the community centers here in town. I like teaching from a community center because it allows us to make our program very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got this really great large space. You walk in and there's this huge vaulted ceiling with these big wooden arches, and it's really old. I don't know, it has kind of almost a cathedral kind of feel to it. Um,
That's cool.
and yeah, I mean, usually we have a very small, tight knit group. There's probably 6 or 7 of us in any given class, um, and our arts, the way that we train at Five Circles Martial Arts. I mean, sword is one of our 5 disciplines. And so I've got students that on any given night we run our classes holistically. So all of our arts practice together. So on any one night, I have students that are working striking and grappling, fencing, working on other weapons other than the sword. And so you'll walk in and they'll just be what looks like controlled chaos. There's stuff going on all over the place. Everybody's doing something
Yes.
different, and everywhere you look, there's something interesting to see. Um, and then I come in and get people introduced, and usually start people out with just an understanding of all of the arts that we teach and their interconnections. One of our big principles behind our program is that we want to help students understand universal motion and universal combat mechanics, and that a swing of the arm in a particular way could be a hand strike, it could be a stick strike, it could be a sword cut, it could be a shoulder throw. It really doesn't matter. What we're learning is we're learning how to use our bodies to generate combat energy.
Mm.
And once you learn how to effectively and efficiently use your body, then that opens the doors into whatever techniques you want to study. Conversely, you can look at a technique you've never seen before and you can say, oh, well, I've never seen it done that way before, but I can tell you're getting energy because you're moving your hips like this and you're creating rotation with your shoulders like this. And then you've got a little bit of a forward lean like this. And so that's how you're making that happen. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, fascinating. No, it does, and I really like the idea of whether you have a sword in your hand or not, power generation comes from the same basic place, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so you could obviously it's not the same effect with sword versus stick or even sword versus hand, obviously, but the mechanics, right,
Mm-hmm.
where that power comes from, it's all related.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of an important thing. And when I see historical martial arts, and I don't want anyone to feel like I'm looking down on anybody or anything. This is a positive show. We're all supportive about people's journey. I find that there's a certain um, group of people that really enjoy HEMA, and it they want to try it out. A lot
Mhm.
of those people don't have. I'm going to borrow a phrase here. It's called physical literacy. They don't have the
Mhm.
physical literacy to really understand it. Um, very deeply, but they get into what they perceive the mechanics of this thing according to this manual, right? And so they do some
Mhm.
things, and they're looking pretty good, except they're not really generating the power here or there. You could tell, like, there's the understanding of it might be going here or there, and it's for them to figure out and explore, and you do it 10,000 times, you get really good at it. And so I want everyone to feel like they have the room to grow and expand like that.
Mhm.
Where was I going with the setup? But anyway, the idea of what you're talking about, understanding where the power comes from in this mechanic, right? The human
Sure.
body is the same. Like, we all have two arms, two legs, a torso, right? Our head's connected through everything with the spine, and there's only so much we can do. And there's universal principles of generating power, and each style kind of does it a little bit differently, but there's only so many ways to kind of move to get it going. And it's
Sure.
really it's good to understand the principles of power generation as a general understanding, and then the specific moves that you learn, whether it's Distrezor or Lichtenhauer or Fior, whoever, right? It's that much easier for you.
Sure. Sure. No, and that's, and so when we start people out in a what we call a universal studies. Their first level is a universal studies level. So at white belt, it would be white belt in our program. They study a little bit of everything, but mostly in order to study the connections between everything.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm teaching them, okay, here's the hand strikes that you're going to learn at this particular level of your practice. But every time you do a hand strike, I want you to also be imagining how to use that same body mechanic if a stick were in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
and every time you're swinging a stick, look at, if I'm swinging from this angle and I didn't have a stick in my hand, would I still be able to deliver energy with this body structure? Because the answer should be yes, right? I mean, because to borrow a very common phrase from the community, there's only so many ways to move the human body. And I will go further and say, okay, there are only so many ways to move the human body. There are even less ways to move the human body effectively. There are even fewer ways amongst that group to move it effectively and efficiently. And now, once you get down to I can move my body effectively and efficiently, the rest of the choices that you're making are strategic choices, not technical choices,
Mm-hmm.
right? The technique is the technique. You can now we
Right.
can argue over some really fine-tuned stuff. I mean, there are plenty of Japanese swordsmen out there that will watch a video and go, well, his pinky is out of position. It's like, okay,
Sure.
yes, we
Okay.
can get down to that nitpicky kind of level, but when we're talking really more about the essence and the core of physical movement,
Yeah.
it's not that big a universe.
Is there really a superior uh, brand of jeans?
It's a yeah, good analogy, good
You
question.
know what I
I
mean?
mean, it's
Everyone loves the jeans they love, and it
yeah,
works for them. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you on that. Because ultimately, when you are contesting somebody in the ring, it's not this style versus that style. It's this. It's this. Uh, I don't want to say combatant, because we're not really combatants, but
yes, yes,
it's
yes,
this person facing off with this person. It's mano
yeah,
a mano, and that's why
yeah,
it's so cool, right? So, and no one learns in a vacuum, right? And in fact, these
no,
old masters didn't learn in a vacuum.
no.
They are a product of their time and place, and they were just genius and dedicated enough to, like, put it all together. And
And
especially
some of
with,
them were just
yeah,
geniuses at marketing.
right. Well, that's part of it, isn't it? Right. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, how many historical records do we have nowadays because that was just the guy that was speaking the loudest and wrote the most books?
Yeah.
That it is not to say that all the historical masters and all the historical sources are just marketing endeavors, but
But
I
it
mean,
is though. I mean, it's not
I mean, it's like here's my style, and they went about promoting it, and they went about, and so it's like, to think that it was any different then than it is nowadays,
right.
that the styles that are successful and the styles that are widely shared aren't helped out by a little bit of just marketing pizzazz.
Mhm.
That's an awfully narrow view to take, I think. But
Right.
anyway,
And it's
sorry, that's
no,
thank
I'm
you.
glad you
Okay.
said that because you took the words out of my mouth. There is a lot of like as a martial arts school instructor, yeah, like okay, this is what we do. How do I make it irresistible to people? Like what do I say? What's my secret sauce, right?
Yeah.
So of course these guys wrote that in, and I'm not saying that it's that they were disingenuous. It's just
No.
they had to have some kind of flair, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes the process becomes a thing unto itself. And
Yeah.
so you're talking, okay, this pinky, no, a pinky needs to be here or there, and it's like, okay, okay,
Yeah. Well, and there's a difference between this is how my instructor said was the right way to do it, and well, let's go back to, I mean, like you said, what's the best pair of jeans, there is no right way. There are effective and ineffective methods for a stated objective. It's like, I want to accomplish this. Okay. Show me how you're going to accomplish this. I'm going to accomplish this by doing this. Okay, well, what you did accomplished what you said it was going to accomplish. It is effective.
yeah,
Now, is it the most efficient? Can we make that better? Can we make it so that you can achieve your goal faster or with greater, a greater rate of success or anything like that? You know, but at its core, it's like, look, that's the only measure that really matters, is what's the goal of the thing and did it achieve the goal.
right. The
After that,
strategic decisions.
yeah, after that, it's all just about refinement. And
Geoff, I'm afraid we're making a whole bunch of people upset right now.
that's all I do. No, I'm just
No,
yeah,
you can love your pair of jeans because they work
sure.
the best for you.
Hmm.
And whatever that is, right? Whatever your martial art is, right? And it works for you, that's great.
Hmm.
Keep doing it. Be the best at that, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but people will differ. And
Oh, sure, sure.
yeah.
Well, and not everybody, I mean, there's a lot of people that are really genuinely after a connection to history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, look, I don't really, I mean, and so to speak from my own orbit and my own universe, the Koryu martial arts, Koryu, Koryu, it means ancient or old styles. Uh, but those styles of Japanese swordsmanship mostly, and I'm going to not generalize and say all, but mostly exist for purposes of historic preservation. They are trying to maintain the practice as it has been practiced, as close to as it has been practiced for as long as it's been practiced, for the last few hundred years or whatever.
Yes.
And there is nothing, I mean, that's a fabulous endeavor. And so when somebody from one of those arts
Absolutely.
says, if you're practicing my art, your pinky needs to be here, they're saying that because historically that's how it was done, and we are trying to maintain the purity of the history of our practice. We're trying to maintain the continuity of our teaching, and
Yeah.
that's a great endeavor. It's a
We should
wonderful
respect that.
endeavor. Absolutely. And but I think the leap that a lot of students, and actually a lot of the instructors in those arts, know that mission instinctively, and they know that thoroughly. And when you say, okay, well, I do it differently, they're like, well, you're not doing my art, so I don't care if you do it differently. But a lot of the students of those arts that maybe haven't come that far along in the journey go
Yeah.
out and they say, oh, well, you're doing it wrong, and you're doing it wrong, and you're doing it wrong. It's like, but I don't do your style, so how do you know you're
Yeah.
judging me based on you're using a yardstick that I'm use the metric system, man. You're in an entirely different measurement group here. Um, and so it's interesting how folks will take their mission, their stated goals, their teachings, and apply those across the board. When it's like, whoa, hang on, that's not what we do here,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And then there are a lot of artists that I've gotten to know over the last few years with my involvement in the community that will just toss out history and culture. And I don't care if this is Filipino or European or Japanese. Show me something cool to do with this weapon in my hand, and I'm going to integrate it into whatever it is that is the soup of my brain and my fighting knowledge. And I probably won't even remember where I learned it or why I learned it that way. Hey, I learned this cool move. And because all they care about is effective combat art as far as they can define it and as far as they can figure it out. It really doesn't matter where they get it from.
It's like the Corsair pirate octopus style. Just soak it in.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, so it's like, and there's nothing wrong with that either. It's like we each get to explore this and have this journey however
I
the hell
think
we want to have.
I even think those people who do that successfully, I mean, who do it well, because let's get serious. Some people use that as an excuse to not be disciplined.
True.
And I think both you and we're into discipline. Like you have to make it work. It's got to make
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
But the people who could successfully just absorb all these different styles and techniques, those to me are the hardest to fence. You can't read them as easy.
Sure. No, and our tradition at Five Circles Martial Arts, the way that our curriculum is structured and the way that we practice, I mean, like steel fencing, we were challenged by the concept of steel fencing and the exploration of fighting with a katana that was made of metal. And so we went back and we changed our curriculum. And it's like, that's not something you can do when what you're trying to do is preserve history. You can't, your art can't be a living art in that it can't evolve and change with the stated goals of the practitioners that are doing it today. And I've had students before that come in and they're, Filipino practitioners or HEMA practitioners, and then they're now joining our style. And they're like, hey, look, I like what you got there, but if you tweak this or you add this, or hey, you should add this concept in, things will come in and things will go out and things will evolve in our curriculum because, we learn and we evolve, and our art is an evolving system. And so I have students that have been with me for 10, 15 years, and the art that they study today is not the art that they started studying.
Yeah.
And it's something different now, and it's evolved because that's the way we approach it. And because what we're after is our most effective martial expression of this sword. And there can be a lot of sources of inspiration for that.
No, I hear
But
you. Yeah.
we still want to have a system, and we still want to be disciplined, and we still want to make sure that what we're doing, the curriculum presents a progression that will take somebody from no physical intelligence and no skill in the thing and walks them step by step to where they need to go.
Yeah, well, right. So you're talking iterative instead of totally revolutionary.
There you
And
go.
yeah, the natural world is like that too. I mean, look at dolphins and sharks. They look very similar because stresses have created them to look a certain way, right? The same with if you look at spider fangs versus snake fangs, right? Those two things are not directly related, but they are designed and function exactly the same way, even though the poisons themselves are different. The anatomy of those animals are totally different, but they go about things the same way. So it is very important, I think, to preserve these legacy sword arts and all martial arts that we have, because it's important to always have them and understand them and be able to dip into them. But who's to say that what we've been given as what it it's represented as, hey, this is the way that it's been for all of these years. Has it though?
Yeah.
Has
Yeah.
it
I mean,
though?
that's, I mean, that's absolutely true. And the reality is that, I mean, human beings and our just core education and our core understanding of the world has changed dramatically. And so, I mean, a human being today is not the same thing as a human being 400 years ago. I mean, there are even
Yep.
demonstrable historical physical differences in average size,
Our brains are
and
smaller.
brains are small. Yeah.
We're losing
So
our
yeah,
third molars.
yeah, I mean, so we're changing over time, and we're certainly mentally very different. We
Yeah.
just don't see the world the same way as our
No.
ancestors do. And so it's like, even if you're exposed to the exact same material, taught in the exact same way, how can you possibly interpret it the same when you come from such different, perspectives? Everything goes through your own lens. How
Yeah.
can you think that you interpreted that exactly the same way? But
Yep.
I'm absolutely for preserving the history and looking back to whatever sources we can find as sources of knowledge and inspiration
Right.
as a starting point,
Yeah. And
but not the end of the journey.
right. And HEMA has an interesting layer on top of that because we're just rediscovering and we're trying to recreate and understand. So in that sense, I think it is important, that the scholarly work is super important. If that wasn't there, if we didn't
Yeah,
have the superstars today who didn't dip into that, we wouldn't have what we have. And we have to be appreciative of that. Um,
absolutely.
but yeah, like how do we know that what we have been given, like kind of like what you were saying before, how do we know that's how commonly, or at least commonly amongst the experts, how do we know that that is what they did? We don't. We take it on assumption, right? And
Hmm.
so, you got to file that away in the back of your mind.
Sure.
If you're doing something that works, that's similar, that if you were to pull it off, and someone said, "Oh, is that a this or is that a that?" You're in the right ballpark. You're doing it right.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think again, it. I think uh, you can find those sources of technique and those sources of inspiration, uh, in a number of different sources. But I mean, even so, like, even something as direct as, something my instructor has taught me, there is the way that he taught me, and there's the way that he understands it, and then I take that and I apply that, and I apply that
Yeah.
hundreds of times, and I make adjustments because my understanding of it for my body is that I need to do this in this particular timing, in this particular way, to
Mm,
make it function for me.
yeah.
And most of that we do unconsciously.
Mhm.
Most of those, it's like he and I will study a technique together, and then, we'll go about teaching our students and living our daily lives, and we'll come back, and it'll be 5 years later, and he'll watch me do this technique he hasn't really watched me do in about 5 years. And he'll go, "Why do you do it like that?" And I'll go, "Well, isn't that how you taught it to me?" And then we both go, "I don't think so." It's like, wait, how have I evolved this technique just through my own practice and application, completely unconscious from the words and the demonstration that you originally gave me? And
Right.
is my technique still effective? Yes. Is it possibly more efficient because I've optimized it for myself? Yes.
Yeah.
And when we go to teach the next generation of students, is my slightly modified version the better version, or is his modified version the better version? Or what will probably happen is that student will kind of evolve their own third interpretation of it. And that's
Well,
all.
yeah, I like what you're saying there because we progress, right? We progress. We don't live in a vacuum. so our understanding of basic things, we progress. But also, I would submit that it's not just us progressing. The people that we practice against, right? That changes the technique a little bit. And
Sure.
just an example of this, okay? I guess I love likening things to other deals. So I play Halo, right?
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
the OG Halo guys. Now, I'm an adult now. I got a lot of things going on. So they've got the Master Chief collection, right? Well, I can go and play a legacy game. It's the same as it was before, and I knew how to play this particular particular map, right? And with
Yeah.
similar buddies, like I know what the role is supposed to do. I know the style. I know how to win on this map. So I
Yeah.
go to play it 5 years later, it's totally changed the way that you win just based on the players. And the thing that I
Hmm.
used to do a certain way somehow isn't quite as effective as it was when I dialed it in, 10 years ago. Like, why
Hmm.
is it different now? And it's just the people that you go against, it just kind of shifts and changes. And it's not that the principle in the book has changed. That hasn't changed, right? What
Hmm.
has changed is I don't know what you would call it, just the soup, the zeitgeist, the something, right? And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
anyway, that could also be something that affects the way that, say, like we're doing that swear chow, even the word, right? Like we used to call
Yeah.
it Zwerchow. Now we're calling it Zwerchow, or I am terrible pronunciation. Like our understanding of these things change, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the methods have their small deviations, and it depends on who you're fighting against. Like 5 years ago, like you're saying, if I tried a Zwerchow against somebody, and I tried it today, I better do a Twerchow, or else it's not going to work, even though it's
Yeah.
supposed to be the same move.
Well, and that's I like those examples because it to use another analogy, like people think of martial arts sometimes in the search of like I'm going to find the best martial art, which is such a folly of an exercise, um, because martial arts is inherently kind of like rock paper scissors.
Mm.
It's like, man, I've been using scissors for years and I always win, and that's because I always go up against people that are using paper. And then that one guy comes along and uses rock, and I'm screwed. And it's like, wow, what do I need to do? Oh, I need to use paper, that thing that I've been beating people that use that all the time. Now that's the thing I need to do. And like, I had some great discussions with a friend of mine that was just an old school judo guy for years, and he was talking about the cycles in judo where, I mean, because if you want to be like honest about yourself as a competitor in a lot of these sports, you can only really physically optimize a few techniques to pull off via muscle memory on command at a time. You
Yeah.
cannot have a library of techniques at your command when you're fencing. You've
Mm-mm.
got some stuff that are your go-tos, the stuff that
Yeah.
you really will do under pressure, and it's a very limited set of techniques. And so he was talking
And
about
they
how in
fade.
judo, oh, absolutely.
You switch.
Yeah. But he was talking about how in judo, they've had the same book of movements and throws, from the time of the founding of judo for the most part. Very little evolution in the moves that are used. But in the competitions, you have, one set of techniques that's winning. And then people will kind of go back to the lab and they'll come back to competition, and the techniques that were winning last time are now going to be losing because people are going to be optimized to do the techniques
Mm-hmm.
that are really good against those. And so
Yeah.
now those techniques are the winning techniques, and everybody goes back and says, okay, everybody's doing osotogari now, so we gotta train to defend against and counteract osotogari. And so they come back to the competitions, and it's this, and they do this cycle where the winning techniques for the next time are really going to be the ones that are designed to beat the techniques that were the winning techniques that were designed, and it just goes around and around and around. And I think swordsmanship and fencing is much the same way. People get into certain rhythms, they see certain things in competition being super successful, they go back and they optimize those techniques, and kind of those are the winning techniques for the moment. And then everybody goes, okay, I know everybody's going to be throwing that technique, so I'm going to try to do the thing that's going to be best in response to that, and you'll get more of a cycle.
That's an
Um,
excellent way to put it.
and again, it's like, it, especially martial arts, like we love our library of techniques and we love the breadth of our knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like I try to dissuade my students from the idea that they're going to be able to make decisions in real time about one
Right.
of a series of techniques to use. It's like, no, 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 no.
It's
We study all
multi-level.
of this to gain a breadth of understanding and to enjoy the exploration of martial arts. But if you want to be a competitor, you need to have two or three go-tos that you can execute flawlessly and with full commitment, and hope that you came to a paper fight with some scissors, right? you know
Instead of
you
a
just
rock fight.
instead of a rock. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree, and I appreciate how you said that. I come from a football background, so my coach would say, "Oh, yeah, the bread and butter stuff, right? Do your bread and butter."
Mm,
Yeah, your go tos, right? Because yeah, there's only so much room for that go to, right? Because it's you're operating faster than the speed of conscious decision making, right? It's just
yes.
boom, it's there. Your body
Yeah.
has to see it before you can crunch it in your mind.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've had this conversation about like all these moves and stuff, and Hema's dead and blah 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 blah, which I
I
totally
didn't
disagree
say
with.
that.
So what did we learn from this? Like this thing we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, which is amazing. What do we take away? Like, what's the actionable thing, or is there? Keep practicing. Like that's basically it, huh?
Well, I think the takeaway for me is to get away from the idea that there's a right answer, and
Okay.
set your aims, set your goals, and then measure your effectiveness against those goals. That's it.
Yeah.
And know that there are many paths to the top of the mountain. um, and then when your technique is not serving your goals, or when your training is not serving your goals, you know don't double down. Find another path.
Mm-hmm.
Explore something new. Change the way that you're doing it. And that's the lesson, uh the halo lesson, and the lesson that we've been talking about. I When I first went into the HEMA school, I shocked people because they would try to feint and get me to do something, and I just wouldn't move because there was no real commitment to their technique. And like, oh well, this works all the time on folks. I put my sword out there and they bring their sword out to meet me, and then we do some stuff in the middle. It's like, I don't want to do stuff in the middle. I'm going to sit back here until either you give me an opening or you're fully committed to your attack. That's the only way one of these two things is going to happen. And so they had to completely readjust the way that they approached me, which they did, and then they killed me a lot. It was great. um, but you gotta look at your goal, and then just measure your effectiveness against it and adapt whatever it is you're doing.
And fight lots of different people.
Fight lots of different people. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, I mean, maybe that's the lazy person's way to get out of the rut you're in. It's really fun to spar with like your go-to sparring partners. It gets very comfortable. You get to read them, they get to read you, and there's a certain
Hmm.
journey, and even a certain amount of mastery that comes from that, right? But it
Yeah.
but it is like you're saying, it's important that you got to try new things, try different things, and it's
Yeah.
easier to accomplish that when there's a totally new person or someone you haven't crossed swords with for a while. Circle
Hmm.
back, find those opportunities, face those guys, and you learn more about yourself, and um, your techniques, your timing, like what's working, like your overall strategy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know being totally aggressive works, and sometimes it doesn't, and certain people it works better, and some people it
Yeah.
doesn't work. Um, yeah, and anyway,
Yeah.
you
I
you
mean,
guys,
I get so excited myself when like and sometimes I think sparring partners that don't know me really well that are sparring with me for the first time, they may get a little weirded out, but I get really excited when somebody gets me in an unexpected way. And I'm like, "What? What just happened? That was awesome. Do that again." And because it's like if I engage one of my techniques or one of my strategies and I'm successful, that's just confirmation bias. It's just like me reinforcing what I already know. It's like, that's boring. If you defeat me in a way that I was not expecting, I have got to see that again. And I get so excited about that. I'm like, ooh, ooh. And yeah, so yeah, challenge, find those new opportunities and challenge your preconceptions and challenge what you think you know and be open to change.
yeah, yeah, I like it. Super cool. So, speaking of open to change, so you've got you've got your martial arts dojo, house studio, but you also are involved in a collaboration, right? So, what is that called, and what do you guys do?
So we've got a group that's called Oklahoma Open Fencing, and really, it really just came from that relationship between my school kind of butting into the whole steel fencing world, and then our local HEMA school, and we wanted to find more opportunities to cross train, but we also wanted to see if we could bring in, anybody that might be interested. And so once a month we have these training meets where basically we've got a 3 hour session, and for the first hour and a half, we introduce a universal concept: footwork, combat distance, combat paths, cutting mechanics, whatever it may be, and say, okay, here's universal ideas about this principle. Now, all the instructors that are here tonight are going to give a stylistic perspective. So, okay, we talked universal. Now let's hear how HEMA looks at it. Now let's hear how Japanese swordsmanship looks at it. Oh, the Filipino guys are here tonight. Let's hear a Filipino perspective. Oh, the Buher guys are here tonight. Let's hear what they think of this. And the collaboration, and then it's kind of like after that universal introduction, it's kind of a workshop where we all share a little bit of knowledge. And I'll tell you, 90% of the time, we're all surprised more by how we're all saying the same thing than we are by how we're saying different things.
Yeah.
But so we do that workshop. And then the second hour and a half, we just gear up and wail on each other. And it's like, find a partner, find a weapon, pick something up you don't normally use, go out there. And I mean, we've had our local Olympic fencers come, and they'll get out there and they'll try out swords that are much heavier than anything they've ever dealt with before. And meanwhile, the Japanese students are picking up foils and trying to figure out how to do this swishy poke thing. And it's just, the collaboration is a lot of fun, and the sharing spirit is a lot of fun, and it's been something that's been really rewarding to be a part of.
That sounds like a huge blast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I mean, that sounds amazing. Yeah, that is super cool collaborative. So guys, just so you know, there will be links to all this stuff in the show notes. So when we release this, be sure that you're checking those out. I was just circling back. I was looking at those steel swords that you get produced, and I was actually surprised they come in a set.
Uh-huh.
That blew me away, because just coming from the HEMA world, it's like you buy the sword, like rapier and dagger, for example. They're like, oh yeah, there's this dagger and there's this rapier, but you have this really cool thing, right, where you've got your katana and wakizashi like all together, and they match, and they just look so sweet.
Oh, thank you.
um yeah, I was like, man, I gotta do this. This is so cool. I can whip out one and whip out the other, and
Yeah.
kind of like rapier and dagger. Although I'm not sure if that's a thing, but initially, that, like, instinctually, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, the shorter
Yeah.
one, the longer one, the on hand, the off hand.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and so we actually, the Akato Armory swords, we have four standard lengths of sword that we offer. So you have your traditional katana, primarily intended as a two-handed weapon, but is functional as a one-handed weapon. Um, and then we kind of and then the second sword, which is kind of very very common, is the wakizashi, which is, you know, that's your offhand weapon. And yes, the two sword style, that's something that we love to train with and love to practice.
Yes.
But you know, just wakizashis, just the two wakizashi against one another and doing, you know, that's more of the close combat. You know, normally you didn't have your katana on your hip at all times. If you went into some household or some business, you'd leave your sword at the door, and or, you know, with somebody to take care of it, and you would just have your sidearm. And so wakizashi versus wakizashi, the short sword battles, especially where that offhand deflection and
Mm.
grappling gets to be a lot more important. That game's a lot of fun. The two sword game's a lot of fun. We have an o-katana, which is really just Japanese for big katana. And there's a few Japanese terms out there that people sometimes use for a longer katana, a nodachi or an odachi. And there's a whole conversation we can have about etymology and terminology. But
Yeah.
the o-katana that we designed was specifically to be similar in characteristics for weight and balance and flexibility to a lot of popular fetter models,
Okay.
because we wanted to have a sword that would fit into those competitions and into those spaces.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not really super historical in its dimensions. It's a little bit of a,
Neither are fetters.
yeah. Oh, there you go. But we
They're
wanted to
way
make
longer
katana,
than yeah.
yeah, we wanted to make a katana that would fit. You know, not that every competition would be like, oh yeah, bring your katana to our competition. But when we first started getting into this, the reach disadvantage between the katana and the fetters out there was just too big a disadvantage to overcome on a regular basis. And so I was like,
Uh-huh.
okay, we need a long sword. So we made the okatana specifically to some fetter specs. And then we have an in-between sword in between the katana and wakizashi, which is a ko-katana or a small katana. And that one we actually put out there as kind of you know, a longer sword than the sidearm, but more optimized for one-hand use.
Oh,
So
cool.
that sword could be a really good for quick draw practice, or if you wanted to do two equal length weapons, because a lot of like the Filipino styles, they really
Yeah.
like an equal length weapon in both hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than, you know, offhand, main hand, long sword, short sword, we wanted to have a sword that would be a really optimized for equal length in the same hand. And so that's why we have those four swords. And so, yeah, you can buy the katana, you can buy the traditional daisho, the wakizashi and katana set, or you can buy the whole four sword set. You know, or we can mix and match and we can do custom stuff, you know, whatever you want. You want something, I'll make it happen for you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I mean, just I just clicked on the site and boom, there it was. Pretty colors and the two swords for like just under $400. I thought, man, that's reasonable.
Well, and that, you know, okay, so when we got into it from a business perspective, we had, when we looked at what we wanted to accomplish, we had um, two markets that we were kind of approaching. There is a Japanese sword practitioner who has never done steel work before, and this is something new and different and probably going to be costly for them to get into when they already probably have a lot of money invested in the gear they've got. Or we have HEMA practitioners that also have some interest in, you know, they do steel fencing, but they have some interest in Japanese swords. But this will probably be a third or fourth weapon to their arsenal and probably not their main practice. So with both of these groups of people, price sensitivity was going to be really high.
Yeah.
So we really set out to make them as affordable as possible. That was our first and primary goal, was to make them affordable, because it's a new niche. Like you said, it's a subset of a subset of a subset. And so we wanted to get rid of the barriers to entry. So one of the things that we did was, rather than try to build all of our fittings and all of that sort of stuff from the ground up, we
Mhm.
went to a production katana manufacturer and we said, okay, what standard parts do you already have, no
Oh, that's
changes
smart.
necessary,
Yeah.
that we can use off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started with that. And some of the parts that we tried, some of the hand guards and stuff like that, were not suited to task. They were too thin, too light, not really intended for heavy contact. And so we went through 5 or 6 generations of the sword, picking the parts and picking the things to optimize. But again, sticking with those already on the market standard parts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how we got to the affordability point that we did.
Yeah.
Because again, we're not, it's like if I had to go out and say, okay, I need you to custom cut a hand guard for me, or custom mold a hand guard for me, that's going to add $60 or $70 per sword, because I have to, either that, or I'm going to have to invest a whole bunch of money up front to order a few thousand units or whatever.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's how we did
Standardization
it.
is the way to go for
Absolutely.
affordability.
And especially when there's, in the production katana market, unlike in, I mean, there are production European swords out there that might be able to be used, but there are so many production katana parts just available on the market for
Yeah.
relatively cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how we were able to accomplish that affordability goal.
Nice.
Are there some elements of the sword that if we wanted to tack an extra $100 or $200 onto the price, could we have accomplished a few more things? Maybe, but I was really happy with what we accomplished with the price point that we got to. It was really kind of exciting.
Well, they look good.
Yep.
And I was impressed. I mean, the pictures look good. I haven't seen them, but with my real eyes, I'd love to. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so
But we'll,
beautiful.
we'll,
But
we'll
yeah,
have to make
they
that
look
happen.
nice. I'm not asking for that, but yeah, no,
No, no.
I might get. I mean, I don't know. Well, I like the first camps, the 2 camps you were talking about. The first one,
Mhm.
it's like, is this something I want to try? And the second one, it's like, it might be in that second category. It
Yeah,
just looks
yeah.
so fun. So I've got a buddy that I spar all the time, and he's really good. And he's not like scholarly trained in anything. Like he's got karate background, and the dude, he's like so hard to read, and he just strikes like a jaguar. And so he comes from, like I've mentioned before, a karate background, and he has the plastic katanas, and I who doesn't have a plastic katana from Cold Steel or whatever? I've got one,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so anyway, when we use those to get into it, there's a level of intensity. It's so fun because you have to close just a little bit closer, and
Hmm.
less distance means quicker time, and
Hmm.
you've got to be so fast, you got to be so quick, and it's just everything's a hair trigger. And
Yep.
anyway, it's just a blast. It's just a blast.
Hmm.
So I saw the steel ones, and I thought, oh man, that's just got to be that much more. It's just got to be so cool.
It,
So
it it is a lot of fun.
yeah.
Obviously I'm personally addicted to it and an advocate of it because, I've spent a lot of time and effort doing it. So, but yeah, I actually have a couple of review tester models that I ship around to everybody. So I'll see if I can't get some out to you for you to play with.
Yeah, that'd be fun. And I've got a YouTube channel, and I'll give you like an honest review as well. So
Great.
yeah, no, that'd be cool. I'd love to do that. Yeah, yeah. So they do look cool. Also, let's see. What do we? There's one more thing, and I got to read this because it's like there's this one more thing, and I thought it was kind of important, but I won't stall too much longer. Okay, so we talked about your school. The geese. Yeah, it's on the same thing.
Oh,
It was on the
yeah.
tip of my tongue. Yeah, so those geese look really fascinating. So the concept is you've well, I mean, if it's this Japanese art, you gotta look Japanese, or at least Japanese-esque, right? So the
Yeah.
geese sort of has to match and pay honor to the tradition that it comes from. So tell us a little bit about how you derived, what are the characteristics, and why do they look like that?
Well, so and specifically talking about the fencing gi, like what I'm wearing right now is one of our training gi. This would just be for just non combative practice. But the fencing gi, basically the kind of the Japanese version of a HEMA jacket, right? We kind of actually went the opposite design perspective on our gi from what we did with our swords. So with our swords, we took the production katana, traditional, just, katanas that were being made, and we're like, okay, we're going to tweak it so it's usable in a HEMA context, because we wanted it to feel as much like a sword as possible. With our fencing gi, we went the other direction. We started with HEMA jackets because when it comes to the jackets, the safety is the most important part. Like, I want it to
Yeah.
look right, but it needs to have the right safety features, and it needs to be constructed in a way that I know is safe. So we started from the HEMA jackets, from the HEMA side. So rather than take a Japanese sword and make it so it could be steel fencing, we took a steel fencing jacket and modified it so it looked somewhat Japanese. And so, I mean, really, it's got a nice kind of cool quilted pattern, kind of a Musashi jacket style quilting pattern to it as far as the look of it goes.
Yeah.
Um, but and then it has a crossover lapel like a traditional gi does. So the the lapel goes from the left side of your neck down to the right side of your hip, but that other side of the lapel is actually a false lapel. It's really it's almost just a HEMA jacket with a diagonal zipper on it is what it is. Um, so you get a really good Japanese gi look, but it has all the same protective features and it has the same protective construction for steel fencing jackets that are already out there in wide use. And with that, we worked with a manufacturer of HEMA jackets and said, hey, would you work with us to develop a fencing jacket that just is like what you already make, but is in a Japanese kind of looking style to it? And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the fans of Japanese martial arts out there, a lot of the Japanese martial artists, when you talk about how the swords look or how the jackets look, the aesthetic is very much a part of those arts.
Oh
Like
yeah.
the visual aesthetic in Japanese martial arts is ingrained, and so it's like
They'll
you
kick
can't
you out
you
if the knot is wrong.
yes, yes. And so we wanted to do as much as we could to bring in that style and bring in that homage to those traditions. While on the jacket side, yeah, we definitely wanted to maintain that. You know, steel fencing jackets have existed for a couple of decades now or more, and there have been a lot of lessons learned, and there's a lot of development that's gone into that. So there was no reason to recreate that wheel. We definitely wanted to start with something we knew would be good for our customers there.
Yeah. Now let me mess around with this program a little bit. Kind of
Okay.
changing the way this thing looks. What I'm trying to do is share the screen because I pulled it up, and if I can't do this in the next couple of seconds, then let's see. Shoot, I thought I was going to be all clever. I'm going to have to play
No
around with this a
worries.
little bit later.
Don't
I was
worry. The link to the website is in the show notes, so
That's
you
right.
can always
It's
go
in the
there and
show
check it
notes.
out.
For video viewers, I was going to show you. They're really attractive looking geese.
Thank you.
And yeah, no, yeah, they're pretty darn cool. And I have a long waist, and so HEMA jackets never quite go down the way that I want them to. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of in
Mm-hmm.
the market for a new one anyway. So anyway, I
Nice.
was so so there's two padded ones, right? You've got the lighter one and the heavy one. And what
Yep.
like
So in this first generation of jackets, the only difference between the light jacket and the heavy jacket is an extra layer of padding.
okay,
And so the light jacket's a little more mobile, and but you're going to feel your shots a little bit more. If
mm-hmm,
you're the type of person that wears uh, rigid protection along your arms and underneath your jacket, the light jacket is probably more than enough.
gotcha.
If you just want to wear your gloves and forearms and elbows, and you're really not worried about your upper arms, or you don't wear any protection on your upper arms or on your collarbone or whatever, you may want the heavy jacket to get that a little additional padding. I personally, I have both. I use my light jacket probably 80% of the time, and I use my heavy jacket when I don't know the people I'm sparring with.
That's probably pretty smart.
It's
I
like,
know.
if I don't
Yeah.
know what you're coming at me with, I might go ahead and put on an extra layer of
It's
protection, as it were.
probably a good idea. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah. So yeah, again, probably for the fourth time, guys. I got links. They'll be in the show notes. If you want to check it out, check it out. They are really attractive looking. And yeah, they look really nice. Okay. So one more thing. Quick advice: someone who's brand new, they want to get into the sword discipline, any sword discipline. What are some tips that you would recommend for them?
So anybody that wants to get into sword discipline and is kind of first starting out, um, the biggest tip that I could give is come in with enthusiasm and kind of bring your heart to it, because a lot of people are intimidated when they first go into a HEMA school or they first go into a martial arts school and they see all this stuff going on and they don't feel like they belong. And if you come into a martial arts school with even a spark of enthusiasm, the instructor's eyes will go wide, the other students will recognize it in you, and you will get hugged into the group faster than you can possibly imagine. Man, if you go in and you're like, I'm really excited to be here, I'm so glad to be with you guys, boom, you're part of the group. Congratulations, here's a sword, let's go. And so it's like, and most of the time, as instructors and fellow students, somebody new comes in and they're timid. We're like, we're trying to bring you out of your shell. It's like, no, you're here, you're cool, here's a sword, let's go. Trust me, as intimidating as the practice may look, we're all a bunch of softies, and we're all a bunch of sword loving nerds, and we are just so happy to have another person out there on the floor with us. So come at it with some gusto, and you will be enveloped very quickly. The other thing that I would say to people is that don't shop for don't shop for medals, don't shop for reputation, don't shop for who's the biggest Billy Badass on the block, right? Go to these various places and find your tribe, right? I will,
Yes.
it's like, you could have the best martial art and the best instructor in the world, and if you do not vibe with them, if you're not having fun, you're not going to stick with it. It won't matter what they teach you, because you're not going to be there very long. So when you go out and you look for these various groups and you look to get into this, look for people that you gel with. Look for people that you can like, hey, I do want to hang out with these people 6 to 8 hours a week or whatever we do as far as training goes. These are the type of people I want to be with. And that's really what you should, when you're selecting what to begin, there's going to be a span, some schools are beginning good at one thing or good at another thing, and you might have goals in those regards, and that's fine. Just make sure that what you really look for is a place that you feel like you can belong, because that's what will help you turn it from a momentary hobby and fascination into something that you can be a part of, and really make a change in your life, really make a difference for you.
Good advice, brother. Yeah, it is, right? Because you get a medal. Is that really going to make you happy? It might. It might.
Momentarily.
I mean,
Yeah.
temporarily. I mean, hey, checklist, good, done that. I feel good about myself. I did this thing. But if it's a scalp that you want to hang on your wall,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't make you happy, man. Like you said, it is the try for sure. Great advice. Great advice. Final thoughts.
Um, Thank you for having me. Thank you for, sharing the love of blade fit and blade sport, and just the study of the sword. And, I personally, one of the main reasons I do this is because I'm a community builder, and I believe in community and relationships. So anybody that's listening to this, I'm on Facebook. I'm not hard to find. I'm freaking everywhere.
Yeah,
If you're interested and you want to know more, or you just want to chat, don't hesitate to reach out to me,
that's
because
right.
I'd love having a conversation with just about anybody that's got an interest and a passion.
Cool. You know, we didn't even talk about Sticks and Steel Facebook group, and
Oh, man.
that's where I met
Yeah.
you, really. And yeah, so creator, maybe moderator, anyway, one of them. Sticks and Steel. That's a very popular place. It's a great mixer. All kinds of different martial arts peoples are in there, and they're just mixing it up and they're talking. So it's a super cool Facebook group if you're into that. Yeah, and that's where I met Geoff, and that's where you'll find him. And there's other
All right.
places as well. Okay,
Yep.
Geoff Beeson, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, thank you so much for joining us at the Blade Fit Today podcast. And I'm just going to sign off and say, slay your demons, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. Everyone, take care.